President Dick Cheney about the leak revealing Valerie Plame's identity as a covert CIA operative to punish or discredit her husband, Joe Wilson, who had just blown the lid off President Bush's lies about Iraq trying to buy uranium from Niger. The Obama administration last night filed an argument with the court on why it should not release the Cheney notes. Why not? Because if the Cheney interview notes are released, future White House officials might not be forthcoming if they are interviewed for fear their notes, too, will get out. Quote, there's a reasonable probability of future law enforcement investigations by the DOJ that will require and benefit from obtaining information from White House officials, possibly at the highest level. If law enforcement interviews of senior level White House officials become subject to routine public disclosure, the White House official may agree to talk only in response to a grand jury subpoena. Despite the Obama administration's growing pattern of secrecy, the filing does appear to offer something new, namely official confirmation or further confirmation that Mr. Bush and Mr. Cheney did in fact discuss the Plame leak. When is not clear. The DOJ filing says presidential privilege covers Mr. Cheney's interview about a conversation he had with the president and, quote, an apparent communication between them. Let's bring in MSNBC contributor Michael Isikoff, investigative reporter at Newsweek magazine, sat near me in the CIA leak case. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Hi, David.
I want to get back to that Bush-Cheney communication in a second, but you have reported on Mr. Obama's secrecy levels. Are we talking both about a pattern of keeping things secret, but also of a similarity in the rationales for keeping things secret?
Yeah, a lot of people who are following this are seeing a troubling pattern here. President Obama began on his first full day in office with a executive order for transparency, declaring open government was going to be the hallmark of his presidency. And specifically in Freedom of Information Act requests, Attorney General Eric Holder said the presumption should always be to disclose rather than to withhold unless there's some identifiable, foreseeable harm to the government from disclosure. And yet time and again, people who have filed Freedom of Information Act requests, public interest groups, the ACLU and others, see the Obama administration retreating to using the same arguments for secrecy that were used in the Bush administration. We saw that with the decision to withhold the photos of detainee abuse, in which the president ordered them kept closed, the use of the state secret acts to shut down lawsuits alleging abuse, the White House visitors logs, which the White House has withheld on Freedom of Information requests, and now even on something historical in nature, former Vice President Cheney's interview with the FBI years ago in a closed criminal investigation, the Obama Justice Department making an argument that these need to be kept secret.
Michael, as far as the Bush-Cheney conversations in the midst of the CIA leak case, if memory serves me correctly from the trial, evidence came out that there was some sort of discussion that was referred to about between the president and Dick Cheney about declassifying part of a national intelligence estimate that would then be leaked out as a way of undercutting Joe Wilson. Is that the conversation, the crucial Bush-Cheney conversation that was essentially reinforced by this document filing?
Well, that's the one that we know about, because that did come out in trial, that in late June of 2003, just as the whole controversy was erupting about those famous 16 words where President Bush had claimed in his State of the Union that Iraq was seeking yellow cake uranium from Africa, and then it was undercut by Joe Wilson. Vice President Cheney and President Bush had a discussion about how to rebut that criticism. And one of the things they decided in that discussion was to selectively declassify and then leak aspects of the national intelligence estimate on Iraqi WMD that they thought would support their case. And of course, that led to Scooter Libby talking about that NIE with Judy Miller of the New York Times. And that was a conversation, a fateful conversation, in which later testimony showed he did disclose a very critical fact that Joe Wilson's wife, Valerie Plame Wilson, worked at the CIA.
The key question, well, at least in my view, from my memories of Scooter Libby's grand jury testimony that got played at the trial, was that he remembered specific conversations, having specific conversations with Dick Cheney about courses of action that Scooter Libby should take. But Scooter Libby said he could not remember what exactly was said in those conversations or anything generally. Is that the thrust of the matter here? We know that Scooter Libby took actions to try to obstruct the investigation. He was convicted for it. We've never quite gotten Dick Cheney's view of what Dick Cheney said to Scooter Libby in the midst of all of that.
Exactly, and that's why people wanted to see what Dick Cheney said to the FBI in this interview as part of the investigation. We know what Scooter Libby said, and he was ultimately convicted of lying in what he said before the grand jury and to the FBI about his knowledge of Valerie Plame Wilson and where he learned it. We also know that notes show that it was Vice President Cheney who first told him about it. So you recall the closing arguments of Patrick Fitzgerald at the trial. He said there's a cloud over the vice president's office. This was always about Dick Cheney and suspicions of many that Scooter Libby, who got convicted in this case, was protecting Vice President Cheney.
Mike, on another note, the CIA tonight requested its third extension of the deadline for releasing its internal report on detainee torture. This time, not an extension of a week or two, but 2 months. How should we interpret this?
Another setback for public disclosure once again. Now, again, it is a delay, so we'll see in 2 months whether we get this very important CIA Inspector General's report, which is a critical document in the whole question of detainee abuse and torture and waterboarding. This was the only government internal review of the matter. It is believed to have been harshly critical of the CIA and how it was conducting these interrogations, but the public has never been able to see it. I think a practical effect of this, of delaying it, is to sort of further blunt the calls for a truth commission and accountability on these on this subject. The longer it can be dragged out, the longer the public doesn't get to see the critical documents that the government has about this, the harder it is to make the case, the harder it is to build the political pressure for some form of accountability. So those, including those in the White House and President Obama, who've sought to deflect charges, are probably pleased by this delay.
Michael Isikoff of Newsweek and MSNBC. Hey, Mike, we're going to get those Cheney FBI notes from the CIA leak case someday. Keep the faith, Mike. Have a great July 4th.
And we'll talk about them. Okay.
Okay, sounds good.